Hi everyone, welcome to Edureka's Node.js series. So today we're going to learn how to use MongoDB and Node.js along each other. We're going to set up a MongoDB environment and create a CRUD API based on Node.js and MongoDB. So before we start with the coding part, we'll just go with some slides and see what's MongoDB and what are the other options in the market to use along with MongoDB or Node.js. So the agenda for today's session is we'll see what's NoSQL, what are the NoSQL databases, introduction to MongoDB, installation of MongoDB, and building a CRUD application with Node.js and MongoDB. So the first topic is what is NoSQL? So NoSQL means not only SQL. So over here, we're not going to work with a traditional database. It's not going to be a relational database where we use a SQL or a structured query language to get data. In this case, we are going to work with the databases which do not follow defined structures for keeping the data. Over here, we don't use a query language. Instead, we use methods or properties which are available on the databases, and we're going to get data from them. The key advantage of using a NoSQL database is the NoSQL databases actually have unstructured data, which can contain a mixture of different types of data, like different models, or including a key value or different types of graph format of data. And these schema, or the way we are going to push data into a database, is going to be very dynamic. So in a traditional database like MySQL, SQL, or Oracle, what we do is table structure will be defined, like how many columns can be added into this table and what are the values of the data which you are adding to the columns and the cells. But in this case, NoSQL, most of the databases don't require a specific schema. So even if you have one table or a collection in this NoSQL, it can have different schema for every row which you have, or every record can have its own different schema from the other one. So it's very flexible. It gives the developers a lot of power to adapt their schemas based on their requirements and what type of records they are going to push in. It reduces a number of unnecessary records in the database, and it also allows the developers to manage database very easily because they don't have to convert one data form into another form. Like when you're sending some information from the server or the database to the client side, like a web application or a native application, they don't need to reformat the structure again into JSON or XML. Most of the databases, like the NoSQL databases, actually store in JSON, and whatever the information is stored on the database without doing any formatting can be directly pushed to a client or a web client or a native application. So it's very easy for the developers to maintain NoSQL databases also. Some benefits over here, like what are the benefits? Again, they don't follow any specific schema. So no specific schema for NoSQL databases. The next point is no query language. So they don't use any query language to get data. They just depend on internal methods and properties to get data from the database. And the third and the most important point over here is NoSQL databases do not follow relationships, or some of them have compatibility to create relations between different tables. But as a design practice, when we architect the complete database, we don't create relations between the MongoDB or the NoSQL databases, the tables which we have, or the databases which you have. Generally, everything is stored in one record. So the next topic is what are the different NoSQL databases available in the market. These are some of the databases which are available: MongoDB, Apache Ibase, Cassandra, Redis, and Neo4j. This is a very small list of NoSQL databases which we have in the market right now. There are a lot of other databases in the market which are following NoSQL approach, and some of them are proprietary to the company which has been provided them. Like AWS has its own NoSQL implementation, Microsoft has its own, and other companies have their own way of implementing a NoSQL database. So based on your requirements or based on the platform which you are going to use, you can choose which NoSQL database you are going to pick. So in this example, we're going to use MongoDB. So we'll see how MongoDB can be connected with Node.js, and we can make a CRUD API with it. So introduction to MongoDB. So what's MongoDB? MongoDB is an open source non-relationship database that stores data in a form of collections and documents. In MongoDB, it's like open source. It does not create any relationships. So what we do is we store everything in a form of collections and documents. So a collection can be considered as a table, and a document can be considered as a row for a normal database. When we create a table, we define how the structure of the table will be and all those things. But in this case, when we create a collection, we don't define any schema over here. We just tell that, okay, this is a collection and this will hold what type of records which we want. I will create a collection named people, and I will just create the people connection and add all the persons which I have in that collection. Okay. On the other hand, documents are equivalent to a row, but in the same case, documents do not have any schema. So rows have a schema of inputting data into the database. But in this case, a document does not have any schema. So one document can be completely different to another document. If you create two persons, the schema of the person can be completely different from the other person. But a document will always be inside a collection. Documents cannot be free flowing here and there. They always have to reside under a collection. So in this case, if you have two documents, like person one and person two, those will be inside the people collection. So next point is it preserves most of the functionalities while offering horizontal scalability. So we can scale our MongoDB database horizontally, and we get most of the features working, and it does not limit us in all the features when we are scaling the system. Next thing is it stores JSON documents in the form of collections and having dynamic schemas. So like I said earlier, all of the documents which we are going to create, like person one, person two, person three, they can have a different schema. They don't require to follow the same schema. So a schema means like if I have a record, if I'm creating a person and I have added a key will be a value in the system. So the key name can be first name for the person one, and for the person two, it can be first dash name, or in the person three, it can be name also. So you're not fixed with a specific schema for storing records. It can be anything. It's very powerful. It can help the developers a lot because they don't need to store null values or unnecessary records into the database just to standardize everything. They can keep a dynamic schema. But it also creates problems for the developers because, like I said, in one record or in a one document, a particular key can be named as something like first name, and in the different document, it can be written as name only. So it creates a lot of problem when the same database is being used by different developers because they still have to follow a specific schema when they are inputting the data. Otherwise, they might have the same value for a record on different keys in the system. So we'll explain you this in an example later on, but we'll cover this in the code example. So the other thing is we don't create relations in MongoDB. So the benefit of this is we don't need to look for the same record in another table and get the data and combine them using join queries and all. In a MongoDB environment, when we develop, we record or we store everything for a particular entity in one document. So example for that will be like, I have a one person record and that person has a salary. So instead of creating a relation between a salary table and the person's personal information table, we will record the salary of the person in the same document. You don't have two different tables for storing the personal information or the salary. You just have one document which stores the salary and the personal information, which is very helpful because now you're not creating any queries or you are not creating any join queries between both of the tables and complicating stuff. And this also reduces the effort which the database has to process when writing queries. The queries are much more faster because everything is at one place. There is no relation between different locations. There are different workarounds or solutions to do relations between the MongoDB collections, but generally they are not practiced a lot. Features of MongoDB. First feature is indexing, replication, ad hoc queries, schemaless, and sharding. These are some of the features which we're going to discuss later on in the sessions and see how these can be used in our applications. So we'll start with MongoDB installation. We'll see how we can install MongoDB on a system and run a MongoDB server and create CRUD API based on that server. So the first step is we have to go to the MongoDB site. So it's called mongodb.com. And over here, you will go to the download center. So the URL will be mongodb.com/download center/community. Because we're going to download the community server over here, that's why we are using /community in the URL. So you will find details about the community server, the version of it, the operating system, and which type of package you are going to download. So the operating system is based on your choice, like which operating system you are using. So you can pick it from Windows, Linux, Mac, and different releases of Linux, different variants of that, and choose the right one. So because I'm using a Mac machine, so it says Mac OS x64x64. So that's the correct version, and I will download the tgz file from here. So it's taking some time to download. Let's wait. So this package is already downloaded on my system, so I'm not going to download it complete. I'll just cancel it, and I will show you where it's going to be downloaded. The download package is in my downloads folder, which is this one. Okay. So we just downloaded this package from the MongoDB site. This is a zip file, so you can just uncompress this file and get the content extracted from this. It's a different version of type of a zip file, so you can just extract it and get the content. So once you open the folder which you get from that zip file, you'll find a bin folder. Okay, so based on the operating system you are using, you will get executable files over here. So the name of the executable files will be same for all the operating systems, but the type of the file will change. So these are all Unix executables. When you're using a Windows machine, you will get exe files or Windows executable files, and you can use them to start your MongoDB server and connect to it. So the first thing which we need to do is we need to start the MongoDB server. So from these files, we can start the MongoDB server. So the first file which you want to use is the MongoD, this one. Okay, so this is executable file. This executable can be used for starting the MongoDB server. So this is the MongoDB server executable. So how to start this file or execute this file? On a Windows machine, you can just go to command prompt and run this file. Same for a Mac machine. So using my terminal, I will navigate to this folder over here. You will see that I have these files over here: Mongo, MongoDump, MongoD over here. So now to run this executable, I will just run MongoD --db path equal to the Mongo database. The db path is location where your db will be stored. So by default, it stores at the root URL, which is /data/db. But I don't want to store it on the root URL. I want to store it inside my user folder. So I will just have tilde, which means the user folder, /data, which is the data folder, and the db folder. So these are not created on my system by default. I have to create them. So I've created them earlier, so I can just use them again. So I'll just run this command and it will start the database server for me. So run this command. Okay, I got an error. The reason is the command is not correct. So you have to write like this. I accidentally added a question mark over here. So just run like this and this will start your MongoDB server. So once the server is started, you will get this line at the end, which is waiting for connections on port 27017. That's the default port for MongoDB server, and it's looking for connections to this URL. And you can find all the other details like where are the files are available. So the files are available under users Praveen /data/db and all those things. So we're going to start our connections to this MongoDB database now. So one approach is using the Mongo executable in our code. I will open a new tab in my terminal, or if you are on a Windows machine, you have to create another command prompt window. So the first tab is running the MongoDB server. You don't need to close this. The second one, it's a new terminal window. Over here, I will run all the commands which I need to connect to MongoDB. So the MongoDB server is running. So now I have to execute a different file, which is Mongo in the bin folder. So MongoD starts the database. Mongo is used to connect to the database. So just run Mongo. So once you run this, this starts the executable, which is a REPL for MongoDB. And over here, I can run MongoDB queries and functions over here to get data from it. So I can just say show DBS, which prints out all the DBS or the databases in the system. I can say use admin and say show collections, which prints the number of collections which I have in the system. Same way, I can just go to show DBS and create a new collection like use Edureka. If the collection is not available, it automatically creates the collection. Otherwise, it switches to that collection. So now the next thing is using this collection. So I'm already in the database and I will just run command show collections. So I don't have any collections in this database right now. Edureka is a new database which is created by using the use command. Now we're going to use this database and add records to it and create collections to it, which will be used in our CRUD API. So before moving to the development part of our API, I was just going to show you another tool which MongoDB provides us, which is called the Compass. MongoDB Compass provides us as a UI to connect with our database and see what records we have or what databases we have. So you can download it as a community edition from the MongoDB site and install it on your system. By default, if you are using the community, it provides you the read-only access. So you can do any read operations from the system, but you cannot use it to store any data into the database. It starts with the by default URL, which is localhost and the port. And these are the default URLs configuration for our MongoDB system running on our machine. So we'll just connect to this. So now you can see it provides us information about what databases we have. So these are the default databases, which is admin, and can go back to our dataset and the local database which we have. And this is a collection in that database. So I can just go to this collection and see what records I have in the system. So these are the records which I have. These are about the starting of the system. When did the MongoDB server started on my system? It started at 11:56. So these are the information which is MongoDB is storing by itself for debugging and all. But we can create our own databases over here and store data into the system. So I'll just go to the home and create a new database, name it as Edureka. So it's not showing up the Edureka database over here because I haven't added any collections to it. So it just created a database in memory but didn't physically create it. Once I create collections into it, it starts storing information. The database I created again is Edureka and collection name is people. Create database. Now you can see I've created the database and it has a collection called people. So now from here I can insert records and see how those will be stored in the database. So I can just create one record which is ID. This is a unique ID for that particular record. So this is auto generated. You don't need to create it again. And these are the values which I want to store. Now I have this record stored into my system with a particular schema which has ID and name. And I will store another record which will be like first name, which will be Amit, and salary NA. So you can see it didn't give any errors that the schema is not correct or you have some problems with it. It allows to store the data as whatever the values you want to store. So it's completely schemaless and you can record these values. And you can also run queries over here. So you write a filter query to find out a particular record from the system. So you can see it as a list, you can see it as a table. So table is for people who are very familiar with the relational databases, so they can at least see how the structure has been created in a table. But most of the time we don't use this table kind of a layout, just a layout to see how the data is structured. So this is MongoDB Compass. So we're going to now use this database to get data into a CRUD API. So to create a Node.js CRUD API, we need to create a Node.js project. So I will just close Compass over here and go to my terminal, exit this and go to my user folder. So I'm in my user folder right now and I'll create a new project or a folder. So I'll just write mkdir node mongo API. Go to this project folder and you have to create it as a node project. So when you need to create anything as a node project, what we do is we run npm init. That's the first step. So that creates our package.json file. Okay. So we run npm init. So it asks us like what's the project name. So we'll say Mongo API, the version of it, description, all the files and everything. So it gives us a preview that package.json file will look like this. So if it is good, just press yes, and our package.json file will be created for us. Now I will open this project folder in my Visual Studio Code. I will click on open node mongo API. So it has a package.json file and now we have to create other files which we require. The first file is going to be the index.js file which starts our project, and then we have to install all the packages which we require. So this project is going to be dependent on different node packages. So we'll have a dependency on Express. I will just write those over here. Express handlebars, mongoose, body parser, and nodemon. So these are the dependencies for this project. So we're going to install all these dependencies in our project. So for that, what we have to do is I will write an npm command which is npm install -- save express handlebars, mongoose, body parser, and nodemon. So I'm installing nodemon as a dependency to this project. It can be added as a global dependency also for your system. But in this case, I'm just using it as a local dependency for my project so that it doesn't install it as a global package. Once all these packages are installed, you will get these added as dependencies in your project over here. You can see what packages are installed, which version of them are installed over here. Now we need to connect our Node.js project with our MongoDB. So I'll just go to the index.js file, remove all these package names. Those are not required. So first we're going to use a package called mongoose. So mongoose is used for connecting the Node.js environment with the MongoDB server. So it's an adapter which connects to it. It requires very basic information to connect to it. It can be extended to very complex implementations. But for starters, we'll just have to define what URL we need to connect and it automatically connects to it. For us, we'll just write require mongoose. Because we installed mongoose in our system, so we can just require it in our code. So once we require this, we'll get the package and we'll assign that package to our constant, which is named as mongoose. The next line, we'll just write mongoose.connect. For creating a very simple connection without any configurations, we just need to provide the MongoDB URL. So in this case, because I'm setting it up on my local system, I have to write MongoDB : localhost, because it's on locally installed on my system, 27017. That's the port, slash the database. So I created the database as Edureka. So I'll just write Edureka over here. So this is the database name which you need to connect. Okay. So I don't need to pass any user information or anything because there is no authentication set up on the database. So I can easily connect to it. But once you add any authentication to the database or the MongoDB server, you may need to provide those information over here. So the next thing, we have to define the callback. So is the database connection working or not? This will help us know the connection status. So in this callback, we get error. If there is any error between the connection, it will just give us the database connection is not successed or why there was a problem. If it is successful, we won't get any error and we can start accessing the MongoDB database. So in this case, I'll just write if not error, console.log success, and else console.log error connecting to database. Okay. So make sure your database is running. So in your terminal window, go back to the same terminal window and make sure your database is up and running. Once you're sure that it is running, you can just start this Node.js project. So in the earlier examples, what we did is we ran the command which is node index.js. So it gave me an error that the current URL parser is deprecated. So I have to pass another option to it. So it's a configuration which I need to pass in the Mongo client. So that has to be passed over here as a second parameter. I will just pass it over here. This configuration is required to remove this warning. So I just added this configuration and I will restart the server. So before restarting the server, I'll just show you that it printed out success. So that means the connection has been successfully established between the Node.js and the MongoDB server. So I will just close the Node.js server again and run the server again. So it prints out success and there is no warning over here. So now I'll stop this again, and instead of using node index.js, we'll write a different command which will be set up in our scripts part over here. So we'll write start. That's the start command for us. The start command will run nodemon index.js. So instead of running node space index.js, we'll run npm start now. So this npm start will point to this scripts over here and looks for the start command and runs this command over here. It prints the same kind of output, but what's the difference over here is if I go to the index.js file, I will change the code over here. So I'll change it to success connected and save this file. So what happens is the nodemon actually watches our files. So it will see if the file has been saved again. It will start the Node.js code again for us. So based on your file changes, it starts the code again and again, which is very helpful. You don't need to restart the Node.js code again and again by yourself. It automatically handled by the system. We are connected to a MongoDB database. Now we need to get the data from the MongoDB. So for that, what we do is we create models. Models are for creating a schema and for accessing the data from a particular collection. So in this case, I'm going to create a new folder, name it as model, and in this I will create a new file which will be courses.model.js. So this is a model for a particular course, and over here I have to import mongoose again. So when you are working with Node.js and you have dependency on a particular package as npm package, you have to import that in every file which you need it. So dependencies in Node.js are not declared as global, they have to be per file. If index.js requires mongoose, so I have to include it in mongoose. And if course.model.js requires it, I have to import it over here also. So I'll just write this line, const mongoose is equal to require mongoose. I have to create a schema. So I'll write var course schema is equal to new mongoose schema. The way mongoose works is mongoose helps us in creating a schema for MongoDB. So like MongoDB does not care about the schema, how you're storing records. And that can be a problematic thing. Like I said, the same collection can have different documents with different keys for the same type of record. So example for that will be like if I'm storing something, I name it as name and somebody else stores it as first name. Now, although the things are same, the values are for the same property, but they have the different key. And if you have lots of keys which are completely different from one record to another record, then it gets very hard for developers to standardize the code. They have to write conditions that find this record or this record in the document. So just to remove that kind of a confusion or an unnecessary burden on the code, what Mongoose provides us is it provides us a way to create a schema and define how the data will be added for that record. So in this case, we're going to define a schema for a course. The schema will be like course name. Course name is equal to object, and this object will define the type of it. So the type is equal to string, and is it required or not? So we'll just define it as required. So this is the message which we get if the field is stored as not required, like our blank field. Next thing is the course ID. So this can be ID which is for the internal use. It's not the same ID which we get from MongoDB. So it can be an internal ID which Edureka uses for naming their courses. So we'll write string again for the type. Course duration will be type string and course fee type string. So this creates a schema. Now we'll define the schema as a model for Mongoose. So we'll write mongoose.model, and the first parameter is the name of the collection. So we'll define as course and the schema for it. When we're going to store any record to MongoDB, this particular collection which is named as course will require this schema to be stored, and it will only derive the data based on the schema. So now we have this model ready. Now we have to create an Express application to connect with our browser and send responses back to us or get data. So the first thing which we have to do is now we'll go back to the index.js file. So instead of keeping the connection details over here, we'll cut them from here and create a new file inside the MongoDB folder and name it as connection.js. Instead of connection.js, let's rename it to index.js, because when you are creating a folder in the Node.js application, it should have because that allows us to export different content or different information from that particular folder. So I will just create an index.js file, and in this we just have the connection details. Now in this file, I'm going to import the course model which we created. So I'll just say const course is equal to require course model. So it automatically acquires the code and it starts up the model for us. Now in the index.js file, I will import connection equal to require model. So this creates our connections. You can see once I imported the file, it says success connected. That means the MongoDB database has been connected to this application. Once we're done with the cleanup, we have to start creating our Express application. So for creating Express application, first we need to import Express. So I will import Express from Express. So I'll write const Express equal to require Express. Now we'll create an Express application. So we'll write application equal to Express like this. Okay. We will import other packages which we need. So we need path from the path package. So path is an internal package to Node.js, so we don't need to install it. It's available once we install the Node.js code. Then we need Express handlebars. So I'll just write Express handlebars, require Express handlebars like this. Const body parser. So that's used for parsing body information from our code. So we'll just import that. So these are all the packages which we require in our code. Okay. So the next thing is some configuration on the Express application. So first we have to say application.use, and we want to use body parser dot URL encoded and extended equal to true. And now we will set up our application to send or handle out the root URL. So for that, I will write application.get, and this is for setting up the GET request for our system. So we'll write slash and a callback for that. So in the callback, we'll receive request and response. And in this callback, we'll just send response.send some HTML. So we'll just write h1, just write hello world and start this application. So once done, I will go to the end of this code and define application.listen to a port which is 3000 and define a callback for it. So if it is successful, it will just print server started. This is the server for Express, and this is for the connection which is done by using Node.js code. So both of them are working now. I'll go back to my browser and see what's the output. So I'll just run localhost 3000, and you can see it prints hello world. So this is coming up from a simple HTML string which we have, and we're going to use handlebars in this code to create our proper views by using handlebars. First, I have to go on top of my file and write application.set the views folder. So this is a folder which we're going to create, and this will be storing the views. So we'll write path.join directory name and the views folder. So what I'm doing is I'm setting up the views folder for this application. The name of that is views, and we have a path. So the second parameter is path over here. So the underscore din over here. This is a global variable which is provided by Node.js. So this provides us the information about the directory in which this code has been executed from. So which I can just get it from here, and from that particular directory I want to access the views folder. Okay, so that will be equal to the views folder which I have over here. And I just create a views folder. I have to configure handlebars in this project. So I'll write application.engine. So this is for the application engine, which is handlebars or Jade. In this case, we are going to use HPS or handlebars, and we'll define express handlebars and define all the options for it. So it requires configuration about which kind of extension we need to follow. That will be HPS and the default layout for it. So that will be in the views folder. So we'll just write main layout over here, and then we'll define the layout directory, like where is this layout, which is dir name plus review slash layouts over here. Now I have to tell Node.js or Express that it has to use the view engine, which is handlebars. So for that, we'll just define application.set view engine HPS. Now our handlebar server is set, and now we can configure it to work with the MongoDB connection. First, I will create a new file which is index.hbs, because this is going to be the root URL, so it's index.hbs, and I will write hello world -hps over here and save this file. Now I'm going to change the code over here, which is instead of sending the response like rest.send, I'm going to use res.render or response.render. So it's going to be response.render. The name of the template which I want to render over here, which is going to be index, and any data which I want to send to the template. So I don't want to send any data, so I can just leave it as blank object, and I will go back to my browser and see what's the output. So refresh, and it says that there's an error. It's not able to find the layout. The layout is something which we declared in our code over here. Actually, I need to add the views part. I have to add the layouts. So layouts are kind of base templates for our template. So they can be used for setting up default configuration, default scripts, default CSS elements for all the pages which we want to create. Okay. So they're kind of master pages for us. And for creating a layout, first the layout are to be inside the views layouts folder. So I will create a layouts folder over here. In that, the default layout is main layout. So I will just write main layout.hps and create this layout file. I have to define a base structure for the layout. So I will just write dev id is equal to main layout and write triple equal to body. So this body is an internal variable which is provided by handlebars. This variable actually holds the template which I actually requested for. If I'm requesting index.hbs or index template in my render, that means this body will hold that template. So internally when this code runs, it automatically picks all those templates and put them inside the layout. So now I'm going to run this code in my browser. So I'm just going to refresh this page, and you can just see that the layout is dev id main layout, and it has a text which is handlebars hps, which is coming from the index.hps file. So I can just change it to handlebars, save it, and refresh again. So now our templates are configured, and now we need to connect to MongoDB and get the data from MongoDB and show it on the page. So first thing which I need to do is I need to create a controller. So as a developer, we should not create all the routes in our index file. It gets very complicated to add all the routes over here. So think of it like if your application has 50 routes, you cannot keep 50 routes over here. It's going to be very complicated for you later on to manage. So the best practice is create a folder called controllers over here. And in this controllers folder, define all the routes which you want. So in this case, I just want to have courses. So I will write courses.js, and this will be the file which sets up the routes, like all the information about the route, and also connects with the MongoDB to get the data and return the template. So the first thing which we need to do is we need to import Express, and we'll write require Express and Mongoose. So once we imported Express, we need to configure all the routes. What routes are to be handled by this controller? So for that, what we need to do is we need to set up a router. So I will define const equal to express router. So this enables us to give the access to the router, the express router. Now I can define router.get, router dot whatever the URLs I want to configure. So in this case, I just want to use router.get and define a route which is the slash URL. I'll define the handler for that, which will be a fat arrow function and request and response. From here, I can say response.send courses controller. I set up the route for the course controller, but I haven't used this controller anywhere in my application. So what I have to do is I have to go back to my index.js, and where I'm writing application.get this, I have to write application.use slash course and the course controller. So the controller I have to import in my file. So I'll write course controller require controllers slash courses. I have to import it over here. So this tells Node.js or the Express that which controller will be used over here. Once done, this configures the course URL. And now in my code, I will define how the MongoDB connection will be created. So one thing I missed over here is in the courses file, the controller file, I have to export the router. Otherwise it will not work. So I have to export it from here, and you can see it's successfully starting the application. So everything is working fine. Otherwise it was giving me error that the router.use were not working. So now it is configured correctly. You have to export the router from the controller file. Now I will go back to my browser and search for courses or course over here. So you can see it's printing the result from the course controller. Now we already imported the Mongoose package in our code. So now I have to create a model from that. For that, I will just write const course model like this and mongoose.model course. So that's the model which we already created in our file, which was the models file, this one. So the name has to be same, course, and the course folder course. So we get the access for the course model. Now on this course model, I can write methods to get data from MongoDB. First, let's create the URL for list, like to create a list of all the courses which are available through Edureka's database. So for that, I will write course model dot find and define a callback to it. In this, I will get error and docs. So error is any error which I received when the connection is made or when the query is running. And docs is the document which are received from this collection. So this course model actually points to a collection in our database. So anything which is inside this collection over here will be as documents and will be received in this documents argument over here. Now let's just write a basic simple check over here. If there is no error, then response.send this course controller again just to see if everything is working. So now I have to look for course slash list. So how it works is when we define the controller in index.js file, we define a base URL for that. So it's course, okay? And once we start writing code or the get request in our controller, we define which URL it should be pointed to. So if the base is course slash list over here, that means it's going to be like this, course list. So I'll just go back to my browser and instead of course over here, I will write course list. Refresh the page, it prints the same content again. So it's able to make a connection to the database and it's working. Otherwise, if there was any error, this wouldn't have printed out and we could have just entered the error like response.send error occurred. So if it is working fine, that means everything is correct and it's able to connect to the database and work. Now I will just see how many records do I get. So I'll just write console.log docs, refresh the page. Once I refresh, I will go back to my console over here, the terminal window. You see there is a blank array coming in. That means there are no records in my database, like there is nothing. So I have to set up that data. So for that initial data setup, I will just go to MongoDB Compass and set up some base data over here. On this connection screen, I will just connect to the local MongoDB instance. In the Edureka database, I have to need to create a collection. So the collection name will be course and create this collection. Now in this collection, I have to make some records. I'll go to my schema and see what is the schema of my records. So first I have to have course name. So I will write course name nodejs with Mongo. Course ID is going to be 1. Course duration is going to be 1. Course fee is going to be 1. Insert. So these are the records which are added back to my database. Now I will go back to my code again and refresh the same page. So once I refresh, it should get the data for the latest courses. So go back to my system and refresh this. It's still pointing out to null, like a blank array. Let's see why. So I'm connected to Edureka and requires course model. Course model defines like this. I think there's a problem with the model. Let's try to do one thing. From our code only, we'll try to add a new record to it. I'll write a simple code snippet for setting some records. Where course is equal to new course, course model, course dot, just copy the names from here. Course name is equal to nodejs. Course ID is equal to 2. Okay, and I write course dot save to save the record back to the MongoDB. So I'll run this URL and we'll go back to the database and see what we have. So the reason is I think the collection name got written as courses. That's why it was not working. Just comment this code and go back to my course model. So it's able to store the record. You can see like it's able to add a new courses record over here. So we'll debug this out later. Now we know like where the data has been getting stored. I will just get the data back from there. So I'm just going to refresh this page again. This is a single record which was added by the save query which we ran. So now we have a record which is in the database. So now what we have to do is we need to create the list of all the courses. So for that, I will just write response.render and I'll write list. In the data, I will just pass data is equal to docs. In my views folder, I have to create a new template, which is list.hbs. Over here, I will just get the data, which is going to be used in my template. So I'll just write HTML content courses. I'm just writing a very basic HTML. You can extend it to write use Bootstrap or other CSS frameworks in it. So courses, and I'll create a table over here. And each row is going to be having the record. So I'll just write TD. First is going to be the TH, which is table heading. So we'll define TH over here and ID and name. So the next record is going to be the record which I want to get from the MongoDB. All right. So this is going to be iterated. So over here, handlebars provides us methods which can do iterations for us. So we just write curly brackets, double curly brackets each. This will iterate the content. So in the courses, when I was rendering this, I was sending data. So I'll just write data over here, and where I need to end the iteration for the HTML, I'll just define it over here. So this defines that whenever this page loads, look for data, and if it is an array, iterate this content multiple times. So over here now I can write this dot course ID and course name, and instead of th we're going to use dd's. Now refresh the page. Now you can see it's printing results which are ID, name, and 2 is the ID and Node.js. So now we're getting data from MongoDB and putting it inside our HTML content. So we have completed an example of getting data from MongoDB. Now we need to push data from our page to the, so for that, what I will do is I will just create a new template. I will just write a new template and define it as add course. In this add course, I'm going to create a form which will send data to our MongoDB or our Node.js API. So we'll just write some basic information like what's the action. Action will be course and define the method for that we post. Let's write add over here. Now to create a form for sending the course information, so I'll just write p input value is equal to blank, name is equal to course name, and copy these records, create a labels for them. Label course name. Okay, copy this label. This will be duration and fees. This one is not required, so I'll just remove this last one. Duration and fees. Let's see how this prints on the page. So first I have to configure the route for that. So I'll just write router.get. That's for creating the post page, which is going to be add. I'm going to write response.render add course. Now let's go to the add page. Res is not defined. That's an error. The reason is I haven't passed it over here. Refresh and it prints this form. So the CSS or the layout for this form is not correct, which we can fix later. But I will just write PR over here to at least make it little sense. Now we got this form and missed out a submit button at the end of this form. So I'll just write add course over here and define it as type submit. So now this form is created. Now I have to refresh this form and press submit. When I submit the form, it says cannot post course add over here. The reason is we haven't configured the URL for that. So we only configured the get page, but we haven't configured the post URL. So for that, I'll go back to my router and also configure the post URL. So get or post will render the form again. So if I add something like this over here, it shows the same form again, but doesn't do anything on the actual form. Like it will not add anything. So if I go to the list, you can see it's only one list over here. I have to write the code for saving the records in the database and retrieving or navigating back to the list page or something. So for saving the codes, already I wrote this small code over here. I will just reuse this code. So I'll write new instance of codes, save, and this save method, you can pass a callback over here, which will let us know that is the record saved in the database or not. So now I can check if the record has been saved or there is a problem with that. So we'll just write error or doc. So doc is the document which is saved. So I'll just write a condition to check if not error, then do this, else if it is an error state, then do this. So if it's successfully able to store the records, I will just write response dot redirect, okay, like this, and send it to course/list. Otherwise, just write response dot send error occurred. So it's going to store the records, but we haven't used the correct values which we need to store. So over here, I have to write request dot body dot the values. So let's see what do we get from the request. I'll just block this code, not to run this code completely. And I will just write a console.log to see what values do we get. It's going to be shown over here. I'll just send some chunk characters from here. Response.send. So these are the values which are getting sent from the client side to the server side. So we can just write response.body.codes name, all of this code, and response.write duration, request.body.duration, and course fees. There was another field which is course ID, which we haven't received from the client side. So we're going to put it from the client side over here only. So I'm going to write math.random, create a random number, multiply that with a big number, and get a completely random number, math.seal, like this. So I'm just going to create a random number for every ID which we're going to store and add it to the course ID over here and save this record. So let's run this code now. So first I will write nodejs MongoDB. Duration is something, fees is something, save the record, course list. It's not able to navigate to this URL. Let's see why. It says cannot set headers after they have sent to the call. Alright, the reason is because at the end of code I forgotten to remove this line. So actually don't need this line. I will just remove this. That was for showing the form again when I post the page. When I'm sending a request from the client side and it's getting stored into my database, that's a asynchronous call. And in that case, the MongoDB will respond later on, which we are going to receive in the callback. Because I had this line at the bottom, this forces the response to be sent to the client side the moment it receives it. And again, after MongoDB stores the record, it sends the response again. So technically it was sending two responses from the server to the client side. That was actually failing. So I have to remove the last line over here. You can only send one response from this code. So I've run this code again, refresh the list page. Now you can see it has a new record added, which is Node.js MongoDB. Now I will go back to my code and say add. So I'll just add some records like chunk characters over here and add course. So it added that course also, but still you can see the ID is not printing over here. The reason is because we have defined that the ID should be in string. And what happens is right now, this is not coming as string. This is coming as a number because I'm using math.seal and math.random to create a random number for the ID. That's why it's not getting stored. So what I have to do is I have to convert this into a string. So I'll just add a blank string to it. So it converts everything to a string and hope it works. So I'll go back to the add course. It's still not adding the value. Let's see, do we have something wrong in the schema? The schema says course ID with a D small, and when I'm sending this request, I'm actually using course ID with a D capital. So that's also another thing. So when we are using Mongo or MongoDB and Mongoose, Mongoose follows the schema approach. So it forces you to define a schema for that. If your schema is not correct, it will not store the data and it will not retrieve the data from the database also. It only looks for the values which are correct matching with the schema. So okay, let's try again. Add course. Now you can see it added a random value to it. So just to check if it allows different types also, I will just remove this conversion to string and run this code. So I will go back to the add. I'll just write check string. That's the course name, duration, fees, course. Okay, so it allows you to save the data and get the value. I think it's internally converting the value to string and formatting it as string to store in the database. Now I will go to the compass, just do a refresh over here, and you can see all of the records are added over here and all the values are stored as strings over here. So you can see like some of the values are different. Some records have some keys, some records have other keys, but all of them are in the same collection. So it's completely schema based. Only Mongoose is enforcing a schema over here in this example. And your applications, you will use Mongoose to create the schema. Otherwise, you don't need a schema for MongoDB. As a best practice, you should create a schema for your Mongoose data connections. Otherwise, there will be some issues like people are using different keys for different name. Like in the same example, I was using course ID with a D capital, and actually the implementation was course ID with a D small, and it was not working correctly. If that schema check was not there, the records would have been added and I would have received blank values or undefined values for that. And that's a problem. So that's why Mongoose is good to create schemas and all in our code. Alright, so this covers our basic example of setting up a CRUD operation with MongoDB and Node.js. So the part which we added over here, which is add with the post method, that is actually example for creating an API also. So even you can treat this as a API or a RESTful API. You can just, instead of simply redirecting the record from here to a different URL, you can just respond with a message or something that the record has been successfully stored. So that will be equivalent to creating a RESTful API from this code. So instead of saying redirect, I will just write res JSON and define message successful and status is equal to OK. So this way, this can be also converted into a RESTful service, and you can use this in your React or Angular or native applications which you are going to create. So thanks for joining in. So this was an example of connecting MongoDB with Node.js and creating a CRUD operation with it. So we have implemented get and post or add or a save operation or find operation by using MongoDB.